Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind Body broadcast with Austin and Marty. And today we are titling our episode "The Mistakes We Have Made." I won't have to say a whole lot more about it. It's what we were talking before the show. Kind of laughing, said it's almost like a clickbait title, but it's not
Yeah.
because we're actually going to talk about what's in the title. But we're going to talk about just things that we've changed over the years, or viewpoints that we've had, whether it be nutrition, training, supplementation, ways we conduct ourselves with our clients, whatever it might be, and how we have changed them for the better. To improve our services, to improve our own training, and what have you.
Because I would happen to say that the mistakes that I've made or the things that I've come to we'll say alter. I won't necessarily say that I was completely wrong. Well, of course I was on some things, right? Let's be serious, but just to adjust and even going full picture with coaching is that if a coach claims that they've never made a mistake or that they're always 100%, I would really look into if that's honesty there, if that is even true, because I don't know a single coach that hasn't made at least one screw up, right? Like at least one. I'll say at least 15 if they've coached any kind of athletes, because if you've had 100 people put on stage and you've had 100 people come in absolutely perfect, I want you to coach me and teach me absolutely everything about how you did that, because that's the first person I've ever heard of. So I'm kind of happy that I've had the mistakes that I've had, because without them, I don't think I would have learned as much as I could. And it's also a way to kind of show your worth in a sense of being able to say, kind of like this podcast is going to be about, that here is what I've made a mistake on, and here's kind of what we've done. And I really like that you brought up before we started rolling here with the recording about the coaching practice side of it too, like as in things that you wish you had done or things that you have altered now or things that you focus too much on, like as we talked about in one of the episodes there about how your assessment template will kind of go from a template into more geared towards them, and that's cool, because I used to try to put people, and this will be the first one that we'll go into, a mistake that I made was I tried to put everyone into kind of that exact same template. Whereas, like you said, some people need to focus more on sleep, some people need to focus more on the training, where if the nutrition's going great, or even vice versa. And that's a mistake that I made, was trying to put everyone into a box as opposed to coaching the individual, as opposed to just coaching the plan.
Yeah, and I think that's something you have to make that mistake,
Yeah.
because you're only really going to learn that through experience. So that's not something, and that's what I tell like the guys that I work with on mentorship. It's like you can't. I'm not going to be able to teach you guys everything, but because there's things you're going to have to learn and mess up on. But some of when I toss in like little things here and there about stuff. Hey, I wish I would have known this when I started, type of thing.
Oh,
You know what I
yes.
mean? Because you just can't learn that stuff. And like when you and I started coaching, we didn't really have that kind of information available to us. Not so much that we couldn't have a mentor or whatever, but there wasn't like, now you have so many good people making posts all the time, and that
Yep.
you can pick up little tidbits about things that you never would have had that before. You had the forums, you could have obviously gathered your information that way, but these like actual practical tips on coaching, I never would have had that.
Oh,
And
no.
I think for me, since we're kind of talking about the coaching side of things, probably the biggest difference is there's a huge difference between coaching when you have 5 clients and when you have 50
Oh, yes.
or 100 or whatever, whatever. Um, and that's the whole thing within the industry, is like, where do you kind of draw that line for yourself, and how do you maintain service with, with being able to obviously grow your business? Because, hey, it's still a business. We want to make money and we want to improve our business. And part of that does mean more clients to an extent. So how do you provide service is equally as good when you have more clients? And I think that you obviously, like, I know me personally, I've gotten more efficient at things and knowing what's worth, what's worth looking at and what's not really relevant.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah, right. And kind of refining the check-in process, like you said, and it sounds, this is a hard one for me, and I know a lot of guys make this mistake, especially when they are, have less clients, is kind of setting that precedent for communication, like how you communicate. A lot of people use, a lot of people might like email, or some people use, an app, or some people use some kind of messenger or whatever, but kind of refining that process and keeping everything collected into one place. Because before, I would find like I'm getting more clients, but I can't keep up with everything because I have like 20 people, 20 clients messaging me here and emailing me and sending this all at the same time.
Yep.
And I have like 40 of these and 90 of these. And it's like, uh-oh. So one thing I've done with my check-in process too, and is just refining the communication. I like to be extremely clear. Hey, this is how we'll do things. I'll make it super simple on you guys, make it easier on me, and try to keep things organized and efficient so everyone gets their proper time and attention. And man, you know what? I'm not knocking anything that people do, but the whole idea of like doing everything through text message and stuff just blows my mind.
Oh man.
When I'm like, I don't know. I just don't. I know some people do it. I just don't personally. I mean, obviously they got to use an email somehow. They have to attach like documents or something, I assume. Mm-hmm. But I'm just like, man, I really don't know how they do that. Like, there's so many things that just about that just don't work.
Oh, I know, right? Like that's perfect. Like the text, like I've seen people text plans before, and I've even had clients that have had coaches in the past, of course. And I ask them all the time, what did you like and what didn't you like? And that would kind of shape, obviously, how I coach today too. But you hear the same things kind of on repeat, in a sense of like it was either disorganized, or the timing wasn't there, or like how to communicate, like you said, wasn't there, because it's only getting, we'll say, worse. And I use that term in a very light manner, because now you can Facebook message someone, you can text message someone if the coach wants to give out their phone number, you can Instagram message someone. Heck, I know coaches that will do a lot of things over Snapchat, for God's sake. So just having so many mediums of communication isn't the way to do it, in a sense of like, if you like email, that's cool, do it all by email. Not necessarily all by email, but having every single modicum. Like, let's say me and you were trying to line up this podcast, and we said, okay, and then one time you text me on Instagram and said, hey man, are you good for today? But we always talk over Facebook Messenger. Well, then I'm not necessarily going to be able to see that, because that's not how we've been communicating. So I completely agree with you that refining the communication and being very clear with, we'll call them boundaries, saying, hey, this is when check-ins are, this is when I'm going to respond to your questions, because that is one thing that I noticed that I was burning out, was being, let's say we'll make it obnoxious, on a Saturday night at 9 p.m., a client can message you that's not in prep, even if they are in prep, and say like, hey, I'm doing this, what do you think about this, or something. It's like, it's just too much. And that I would say is not even being the coach being available. I would say that's being the coach being, you used in the wrong methods. It's because there's no way to keep that kind of collective going in terms of responding to questions. And if they ask the question, then where are you keeping the collection of the answers to? Because we even talked about that, how you have your really good Q&A format, right? You can kind of document that and say, okay, here's where I talked about that, and be able to send it to people, as opposed to always having to be on your phone at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday night responding to the same question you responded to 2 weeks ago.
Well, what you said there is the collection. That's the thing, is like, where do you collectively answer everything and keep everything? So
you got it.
When you think of it from a coach's perspective, like if you're a client listening, or a potential client, it's not because a coach doesn't want to talk to you. It's because you're actually going to get a more quality service if you keep everything. There's a reason that they're telling you to do it a certain way. Mm-hmm. They have a system, and they have things down to where they have your information in the same spot. They're doing things a certain way. They're going to be able to give you the best attention if you follow what they're saying. There's a reason. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's definitely one. Oh man, so we could go into a lot of the stuff that we talked about in previous episodes, as far as the myths or the old some styles of thinking that have been debunked, and advancements in within our industry. I would say a lot of those things that we once thought, you and I probably agreed with at some point. I mean, everybody did.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Sure.
because that's all the information that we had,
Yep.
at the time. I would say for me though, man, probably the one that I had the hardest time with and would probably be peaking athletes.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yep. Go for it.
yeah. So, and I, if, and that's, I think the scariest thing for a new coach. It has to be,
Yep.
is peaking athletes. Why? Because you have zero freaking experience doing it.
Yep.
Most people, the experience that they have is if they have competed, they have been peaked by a coach. Usually, if they work with somebody,
Sure.
that is literally the only information that they have to base it off
of. Yep. You got it.
and that's it. That's it. So, and that's my advice to a lot of new coaches is if they actually plan on working with prep clients, which is entirely different than working with general nutrition. They're just because of all the psychological components and like actually getting them on stage type of thing. But if you do plan on going into that realm, learn as much as you possibly can about peaking. I mean, there's good podcasts about it. I don't know if you saw the one with Joe and I that we did with Cliff Wilson here recently.
I've seen it, but I haven't gone into it. You guys go into I think that was all about peaking, or wasn't it?
Yes, and Cliff's fantastic at it too, and he's so stuff like that. Those kinds of resources people definitely want to listen to. I know, like I said, that for the longest time, I'll be honest, a lot of what I did, and I feel that this was probably for the better, is I just used really mild peaking strategies. Why? Because I wasn't going to mess them up.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had my clients in great shape. So if I had them at 90% peaked, we're good to go, right? I mean, they're going to be just about as good as they're going to get. Now I have done more aggressive peaking strategies the more I go and the more I've tested it out, doing things like actually getting, and people talk about this magical scenario, but it rarely ever happens. The whole being ready ahead of time,
right?
Type,
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, like if you can actually do that, and you have clients that you've worked with long term, that you know that you can have them ready ahead of time, practice peaking, doing a practice loading, a couple weeks out or something along those lines, like that kind of stuff. You can dabble with it a little bit more the longer you go on and the more experience you get. But yeah, I would say I don't want to say that I messed up a ton of them, because like I said, I used a moderate peaking strategy because I just wasn't comfortable doing things like 1,200 carb rapid backload the day before a show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was probably for the better that I did them. I did it that way. But yeah, that's definitely one thing that I would say that took a lot of time to learn.
Yeah. I would say that mine would be almost hyper analyzing the peak. To a bad way, in terms of, okay, was the water this, was the carbs this, was the salt this, like almost to the point of where I would make it so difficult for myself, let alone the client, to manage that and have to go back through. And so it was more of a stressful thing for me, as opposed to, like you said, having them be that 90%, and that's way more than enough, as opposed to if you try to go for, we'll say, that 103%, that they would it would crash and burn, and then you would have to try to, like, we call it damage control from there, whereas as opposed to just, having focus in, like, being more scientific on it, as well as not just going so far off the deep end with, okay, have like that sip of water here, have this here, giving them too much to do, especially on like a show day, like having it be more concise, having it be more clear, having it be more info beforehand, which now I do have all the kind of that fun stuff that I send to people beforehand, as opposed to kind of having having them have so many questions beforehand. Now I kind of have like a general Q&A, like as in when should you get the hotel? When should you, like, I think we even had a whole podcast on that, right? Like being close to the hotel and things like that. So that's one thing that I would say I messed up on, or have definitely improved, would be just having a better strategy for, like we said, communication as well, but also just having better general peaking methods in place, as opposed to just kind of going so far, like you said, doing something extreme like that 1,200 carb backload the night before and just hoping it works.
Yeah. You talk about the organization and simplicity, stress relief, just keeping people calm
Oh
on
yeah.
show day. I mean, that's really the biggest thing. And I think over the years, I have become, I don't want to say it's not like I'm less excited, but I present myself differently when I email. Obviously it's just an email. You can't see it. But if someone's freaking out, I don't freak out back. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I make sure that, and I'll tell people too, and the people that are really intuitive and really have worked with me a long time, they're like, you're always calm, no matter what.
Hmm.
You're always calm. Like, well, I might not be calm. Like I might be slightly worried at some point, but I know that that's not going to do any good for me to portray that to you.
That's right.
And it's just going to make things worse. I know that I'm going to figure it out and it'll be fine. So yeah, I mean, just that's the one thing that I've noticed I had a hard time with in some people's peaks is there was too much for them to go over in the protocols that I gave them, and it probably stressed them out
Hmm.
because along with that they got the tan and the girls, they have to do their makeup and everything. It's so much.
Yeah.
It's so much.
Yep, no, you
So,
got it. And then, then taking that too. So what I would have messed up on from the coaching angle too would be not making, like I said, like even those boundaries for the coaching, having them be more on time with assessments. So which would also make me more on time with assessments. There's another coach. I don't know if you know who he is. His name is Andy Morgan. I believe he's Brit. He now lives in Tokyo, I believe, at one point. But he really had a lot of parameters, as in you can email me twice a week. You can do this, and people will kind of like with the podcast I was listening to about him. They were saying, well, doesn't that kind of limit like the 24/7 coaching or the whole point of a coach? And he said, not really. It just makes the client now have better adherence, make better questions, as opposed to it being more of a, I don't want to say like a friend, or like, people can contact us and saying like, oh, this is what happened this week. And it's not to do with nutrition or the coaching, but it's almost like a nonstop dialogue, which that's not really a full-on coaching. That's more drifting into, either flat out psychologist or flat out like being like a best friend type of thing. And it's not to say, because there's devil's advocate there. It's like, well, do you not get to know your clients? Do you not know about their families and things? Well, it's not saying that. It's just saying that if you don't have clear boundaries, and this is me talking to myself, if I don't have clear boundaries on assessment times, and they don't do that, it's almost like they can walk all over us. And I know that sounds so weird, and some clients might not quite understand that if they're listening, or even potential clients saying like, oh, the coach should be kind of there 24/7. Well, yes, they should, but we also, a great coach is going to have more clients. It's like my mom always used to say, you want to go to a restaurant that's busy because that means the food is good, and you have to wait a little bit for the food, and that's exactly it. I'm not saying that you need to wait like a full-on week before you get an assessment reply or before your coach gets back to you. That's also a bit silly. But like if it's like the hyper communication is there and it's on top all the time, and they're turning more into, we'll say, like a best friend as opposed to a coach and client relationship, that also can hinder it too, because then there's no more respect in a sense on both sides, right? It's like if I say that we're just like us, like we always have the podcast at the same time, but if we don't, we communicate about that, right? And if we don't have that, that can kind of have the respect gone from both ends, in terms of, okay, he's gonna slack off on the time, and as opposed to making being kind of confident in your coach that they're gonna be back on time with you, and you have to be confident in yourself too as a client to put your stuff in on time, so that you can kind of have that great relationship.
yeah. And you have to set those boundaries right from the get go. And that's what I never did before, is it was always like, oh shit, this is way out of hand.
Yep.
Now I can't fix it because now I've allowed it to happen.
Yep. No, that's
type
right.
of thing.
You got it.
And what that also does to the client is they start overanalyzing stuff that doesn't matter on their end also. You know what I mean? Because it is that nonstop dialogue. And I'm like, no, you don't need to worry about that. Like, if I'm not saying something to you, it's because you don't need to worry about it.
Yep. You got it.
If it matters, if it's relevant, I'm going to tell you. Like, I want clients to have that trust in me that if I'm not talking about something, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. And you'll get those questions too, right? And I would say I made a mistake in terms of responding to that almost a little bit too fully. Like if someone says, oh, okay, I see someone eating pizza backstage. How come I'm not eating pizza? And then I would take too much time explaining it to them about why we didn't. And that was something called the information dump. Like they don't need to know that. And especially on show day, they don't need to know why they're not eating pizza. Just say, hey, listen, you've trusted me this far. I've trusted you this far. We can talk about this later, maybe, but just know you're not eating pizza for a reason. We'll talk about this later.
yep, yep, I agree.
Okay.
Man, we could talk. That's like a whole podcast in
Oh,
and of itself.
I know, right? Yeah, that's definitely like the coaching chronicles. What we've heard, seen, and whatever else you want to call it. Okay. I'm going to switch the gears then. We'll go a little bit away from the coaching stuff. We'll even go into protocols or practices that I firmly believed in, and I guarantee you many other coaches and just competitors and even just general athletes believe too, is one of the probably the number one thing for me that kind of blew my mind was that training to failure every single set, or we'll say pass failure with assisted reps, spotted reps, is the end all be all for muscle growth, and that's the only way to do things. That was a mistake of mine because there is not only like CNS overload that we've talked about, central nervous system overload, but it's just it doesn't have to be that way. That strength and failure and only gauging strength is the only way to progress. Just progressive overload is not it. There's many other ways. Like we had a whole podcast on intensity. That's one of the other gauges you can do. And I kind of went too far away from that and just was asking too much. What is your strength? How is your strength? Is your strength dipping? Is your strength not dipping? And as we clearly know that like during a contest prep, at some point your strength is going to dip. And that does not mean that you're off track. That just means that we're hitting a certain point in prep where you're either not able to hold on to strength or you're not gaining strength. But again, this is not a bench press competition in terms of aesthetics. We're not trying to attempt to be powerlifting coaches right now or strength coaches or peaking for strength. We're talking about peaking for condition, or even just getting people into condition and knowing that the stronger athlete can and should and will be the bigger muscled client, but it's not 100% the end all be all. And that's a mistake that I made, well, even with my own training 18 years ago, going just off of that as opposed to focusing more on the technique, focusing more on intensity, focusing more on not necessarily rep tempo, but just controlling the weight, not just going, I need to get stronger and that's the only way I'm going to get bigger.
Yeah, and man, I don't know how long we've known each other, but and I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I've messed myself up so many times thinking that I was just the machine, and that it's and it doesn't happen to everyone because there's two different types of people. There's a lot of people, they'll physically stop before, or mentally they'll stop before their body reaches that point.
Mm-hmm.
But there is the type of person that their body will break before their mind breaks, and that's what gets you in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me to the T. I think, truthfully, I think that I kind of have a frail nervous system just from working with so many people. Like, I just can't handle shit that a lot of people can, which is super frustrating because it makes me feel like a wuss. But I know that, hey, my body just can't recover from it from a nervous system standpoint. I've ended up with all the adrenal insufficiency issues in prep where I ended up in the hospital and just all kinds of, bad stuff, obviously. And all of those mistakes that I made personally definitely helped me become a lot better at auto-regulating people's training.
Yep.
So that I literally learned almost everything about biofeedback from messing myself up. No
Yep.
joke. Like, no joke. Because because before I didn't pay, I paid attention to it, but I didn't know. Like, I didn't really know where the limits were and what the signs were to look for other than, people say online, are you more tired? Is your sleep messed up or whatever? I'm like, yeah, that general stuff makes sense, but you don't really know until you've made the mistakes yourself. And so, yeah, training wise, I totally agree. Regulating people's intensity during training sessions. I have people that can take that literally can, if they take one set to failure in training every session, everything else, it's pretty intense, but it's not, they still have some reps in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's their limit.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, they're taking 1 to 2 sets of failure on every single exercise.
Yeah.
And they're fine. They're fine with that. They progress good with that. And obviously there's other things to consider too. What's my failure versus somebody else's failure? Is it really true mechanical failure, or is it just that, it hurts, so I stopped failure?
So we'll call it psychological failure.
Right. So that's the difference. My failure is the weight stops, I fall down, something breaks, I die. Like that's, that's failure. Well, yeah, you can't do a lot of those sets within a training session. So I won't say that I wish I could turn back and fix those things, because obviously I learned a lot from it. But man, I've messed myself up and put myself in a lot of holes over the years, trying to learn how to regulate training. And so with that, I've definitely learned about people can train at all different frequencies, all different volumes, all different number of days per week, different types of strategies in terms of intensity techniques within their training. There's just so much. Like I've found out how complex it is, and how much it's more individual than it is science, because now we do have a lot of good stuff popping up in the literature about, hey, what's the minimum effective volume? What's the maximum effective volume or recoverable volume and all this? I'm like, well, that's all fine and dandy in a lab, but it really, like, of all the studies we have on nutrition, supplementation, everything, it translates so little into real life.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, man, I could, all this, I looking back, like all the idiotic shit I've done in my life,
but it's like if you didn't, it's not even so much if you didn't admit that to others, but if you didn't admit that to yourself, it's like, I don't think there's any growth as an athlete or as a coach either, right? Like that just, it's just moving things. Oh, well, I could have done that better, as opposed to, no, that was wrong. You can just, what's that, sorry?
I'll tell you.
Yep, go ahead.
I'll tell you what also is that it helps when you've messed stuff up, that you can relate that to the client if they think they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, why can't I train like so and so on Facebook trains? I'm like, well, I'm gonna tell you a story. Are you ready?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can kind of go back through it like that and say, no, you're not messed up. Just like when we talked about disordered eating, people think they're the only person that has ever went through binge eating. I'm like, no. Oh,
Lord, no. That's right.
So having some being able to relate to the clients a little bit is also real helpful, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then I will talk about another one here that I kind of made a mistake on, and this has gotten significantly better, and I'm still trying to improve it, and I catch myself doing that. It's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I remember the first time I heard about it was years ago, and it's just overstepping your area of expertise. Like in a sense of commenting on something that either you don't know about, or commenting on something that you've never done or gone through. It's like in terms of, like, let's say you are now a great coach, and you have been to training athletes for a while, and then someone says something about, oh, I have shoulder pain, and then you say, oh, well, it's just this, and this, whereas you're not a shoulder expert. You're not going to be able to know exactly everything, and if you do, this is going into another one of those, if your coach says they do know everything, or if your coach has or seemingly has all of the answers, I would, to take a look a little bit into that further. Whereas, like, I will say, like I even asked you some questions last week, right? We'll say appeal to experts, as opposed to having that Dunning-Kruger effect where you think you know everything about everything, and now just because I'm a bodybuilding coach, now I know about powerlifting. Nah, it's just that was it. And I would say that this would have been in my first probably 2 years of coaching. even being a young man when I was 22, 23 or so, and when I was first doing this, we'll call it young man syndrome, and I've got no problem calling it young man syndrome because I had it for sure, and I knew everything, of course, right? And I knew how to fix your binge eating habits, and I knew how to fix your emotional eating, and I knew how to fix your scapular subtraction and retraction and abtraction, and those aren't real words. I'm just saying it. That's how conceited I would have been at one point, and so that getting better at that would have been it. Now I do outsource to more experts. I do enlist some posing help from some girls locally and from not locally too, like online, like getting people like Kenny Wallach to help out with posing, and not saying I can do it all for you. It's being more of a specialist and being more real with yourself about what you know and what you don't know.
Oh yeah, for sure. And a lot of the time on this stuff we can't help, but there's somebody that can help better.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
You know what I mean? So it's like, what's that? Go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's how foolish I would say that I was, and that was a mistake that I made was not outsourcing that, or saying that I can do this, or that I am just as good as person X at doing this. When no, I really wish even if I did it for the first 2 years, I wish I had did it never, or hadn't have done it, and just immediately started appealing to experts as opposed to just keep going into that I know it all type of thing.
Yeah, and I literally had this discussion this morning, or I replied to an email this morning about somebody with the shoulder issue.
Oh, awesome.
And we've modified some training stuff, and I've talked about some basic things based on the feedback. And I said, look, at this point, about all else I can do is I can watch a video of the movements that are hurting, and I can probably see if there's some kind of issue with range of motion, and so on and so forth. But that's it. Beyond that, there's a couple people I would suggest you contact that I trust this is all they do all day long is they fix this kind of thing. So, let's contact them. It's like if you look at a professional athlete, they have a team.
Yeah.
They don't have a coach. They have a team.
Yeah.
You know what? They have a coach that does, like, take fighters, for example. They have a nutritionist.
Mm-hmm.
They have a massage therapist. They have a wrestling coach,
mm-hmm.
like especially MMA. They have a wrestling coach. They have a striking coach.
Yeah.
They have a jiu-jitsu coach.
Mm-hmm.
They have they have everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So any professional sport. So if you want to think that you don't need to outsource and build your team is just foolish. I mean, hey, yeah, there's a lot of clients I've never had to outsource anything on, and that's fine. But there's plenty of times where I'm like, hey, this is probably going to be better, or it might even just be a time thing. I'm like, hey, I can probably figure this out, but this person's going to be able to do it in about a fraction of the time.
You got it. And a fraction of the time and better.
Right. They're going to figure this out so quick. Like you're going to know by the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, and I'm like, for me, it's going to take me several updates to sit here and figure out what the heck's going on. And it's just not really an efficient procedure to do it that way. So yeah, I totally agree. Outsourcing is cool. And especially now with the internet and social media, people can do anything online, like injury rehab, evaluations. Like there's people that do that. You don't ever even have to see them in person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, posing, that's another one, right? We have posing coaches. You don't even have to see them in person.
Yep.
You just Skype with them. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
You got it. Okay. Do you have anything else from training or nutrition or supplementation that you've believed full-heartedly and then kind of messed up on or wish you had done differently?
I bet you nutrition, the one thing I would say, the one thing that I've gotten a lot better at nutrition was, and I had the concept, but I don't think I quite had it nailed, is kind of like cyclical, the whole cyclical dieting strategies in terms of like refeeding and how,
mm-hmm.
and I'll say this, being confident enough to completely scrap the plan and throw in unplanned refeeds or unplanned days off or people call them, or like diet breaks or stuff like that.
Yeah.
I probably knew about these things. I didn't have the confidence to do it as much as I should have. it was to the point where something had to really be off. Like, okay, we need to do this instead of just your weekly refeed. I'm going to call an audible today and we're going to do this. Whereas now I'm like, nope, we're doing it right now. I know exactly what needs done,
Yep.
and it's obviously a comforting thing to the clients too, to show that confidence. It always is good stress relief for them. And 9 times out of 10, it works the way it should. But yeah, it's more an experience thing. Again, that's
Yep.
all. That's really all
Yep.
it is.
And that's a really hard one to gauge in terms of, is that really mistake was having more experience? You know what I mean? Like I felt that one of the things that I didn't make a mistake on was that I waited, I want to say at least a good 3 or 4 years before I tried to put my first person on stage, as opposed to learning a little bit or just competing myself and then saying, okay, I can do this. It was more the researching, making sure that, like you said, I was confident in myself, at least enough to do the bare bones of the competing, as opposed to just being overconfident in the wrong way, and then we'll say not potentially putting someone's health at risk, but not having someone show up in shape or something along those lines, right? So I'm more on the side that you are, that the mistake that I made would have been like a lack of confidence, whereas that would be something I would be able to go back to past Marty, and say, listen, you do know your stuff on this. You do know what you're talking about a bit more on this angle of things. So be a little bit more confident, as opposed to, like you said, being like, oh no, let's go by the plan, or being able to interpret that biofeedback better. But that's a hard one, is being able to interpret biofeedback perfectly in your first year or two of coaching. Let's get real. I don't think, outside of not only having the experience of yourself of lifting weights, experience of yourself of going through any kind of extreme fat loss or extreme muscle gain, being able to have that flat out knowledge to be able to interpret the biofeedback. And there's no real definitive books on that. You have to kind of get your feet wet with clients and kind of be able to listen to them and see, what are they saying, and are you listening well enough to the client, or are you just kind of putting them in a box? And that would be, I even have that written down here, right there, trying to fit too many people into a box, like as in, oh, I'm tired, okay, cool, you need a refeed, okay, well, why are you tired? And going a bit more, getting more information, as opposed to making too hasty of a call. And not necessarily that I did make too hasty of a call, but just saying that I would dismiss any other information, as opposed to gathering it more. Like, as you said, now you can make those calls if you do have the information, like you said, as opposed to waiting for someone to say, hey, listen, we need that full diet break. You have all of the cues. Here's what we're doing, as opposed to, let's wait and see a little bit more, like being able to be more confident in yourself and making those cues.
Yeah, you're right. And that's kind of the thing with a lot of the people coming up that want to coach. They're so set on, I want to be a contest prep coach. I'm like, why don't you start with some working with general clients? And honestly, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be 75% of your business anyhow. I don't think people realize that a lot of us coaches work with way more general clients than they realize.
Yep, you got it.
I mean, there's guys that work with primarily contest prep, and that's fine, but I would never limit myself to that personally. I mean, that's absurd, limiting all the potential clients.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna miss out on working with some really cool people, and also miss out on helping some really cool people too.
Yeah, you're definitely right.
Okay. So then another one to go into for me for nutrition, as we talked about before, was the magical anabolic window. In terms of, I put way too much emphasis on that for quite some time, in terms of recovery, muscle growth, and just because it was so out there that this was so important, and the science hadn't necessarily been caught up yet, or they hadn't done enough science on it. And I'll kind of clarify what I believed, or what most people would have believed, I'll say, that was the anabolic window, was that as soon as you were done your resistance training program, that you needed to get protein and carbohydrates in as soon as possible, let alone they needed, and I'll use that's what I believe, needed to be some form of simple carb, such as sugar, dextrose, with protein powder. Also, that was another thing that I believe, that it had to be protein powder, because it had to be so quickly digested, and kind of all those things there. And that if you didn't do this outside of 30 minutes of your resistance training, that you were now catabolic, you were missing out on muscle growth, you were eating your muscle tissue, you were gonna be impeding fat loss and all these things. And I believe that way too much, as opposed to, and it's, I don't necessarily say it was my fault, but then it was, making sure that I would be able to look at that later when the science came out, showing that no, if you had a meal adequate time before the workout, that it's okay. That just like we went over on the last couple podcasts there about that meal frequency is not the end all be all. That you do have some wiggle room. That the caloric and macro total is much more important than the meal timing. And so just knowing that, and so why that was a mistake is that I probably put too much pressure on clients to do that. That they had to eat this meal potentially at the gym, that they had to have this time constraint on things. I even did it to myself, but also clients weren't necessarily me. And that'll segue into my next part of that after this, is that people aren't us. People like clients aren't necessarily going to have the same mind frame as us. Like, as in, what do you mean you mentally hit failure on those reps? What do you mean you couldn't push past that pain? What do you mean you only could do this? And that would be a limiting factor, would be believing that all clients are us, or that they have our mentality, or especially that they know what we know. AKA that some people don't know what a carbohydrate is. Let's get serious. I've been asked before, is a banana a carbohydrate? And like, for me to laugh at that is cool, but also go, no, yeah, of course it is. It is a carbohydrate. Medium banana has about 30 carbs, blah blah blah. And that's not necessarily a mistake I made, but a mistake that I've seen is people, coaches or anyone helping anyone out with their fitness, is that they assume that the clients know what we know in terms of a general background, which they don't necessarily have to. But that would be it for the anabolic window, would be you having to do those things in a specific time. As that's a mistake I made, and now I wish I was a little bit more lenient on that back in the day.
I would say my response is almost even a little bit broader, is the whole idea of just muscle loss in general, how that happens and what it actually takes to lose tissue outside of somebody like having surgery or something, you know what I mean? And their muscle atrophying, like during general fat loss phases and contest prep, and just as a whole for someone that's following a routine, when we're looking at meal frequency and things that we talked about, fasting, like now people accepting the idea of fasting, and people accepting the idea of different meal frequencies and all of these things. Like what it actually takes for somebody to lose muscle tissue that is getting in that is hitting their macro totals, and that is getting in, as long as they're not eating like one meal a day or something obscene, that, and doing 9 hours of cardio, it's ridiculously hard. And they even did some of the studies they did on contest prep, and these were all on natural bodybuilders too. Mm-hmm. So, which makes me laugh hysterically when you got all these guys loaded up on all kinds of drugs that talk about losing muscle tissue. I think it's hilarious. I think it's just funny. I'm like, you guys are ridiculous. Yeah. That's why you're never in shape. It's like in the studies, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I've looked at them several times. I've heard some guys talk about them. The amount of muscle tissue loss was tiny, and it was tiny. And these were guys that were probably hypogonadal by the end of the prep. They had low testosterone levels. They had low thyroid levels. All their hormones were in the tank, and they lost something like 2 pounds of muscle tissue in like a 6-month prep.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's nothing that you're even going to see
Yep.
on their body.
Yeah.
Unless they lost it all in like one quad or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean? But yeah, just the whole idea of muscle loss in general, and not worrying over that if somebody does have to use a funky meal frequency or timing or something for their plan. And we talked about just adherence and lack of stress towards adherence being the most important component. If the plan that they can follow is the best plan.
That's right.
Yep. So that's one, definitely the idea of muscle loss, and not being afraid to kind of think outside the box, not being afraid to push people in a prep without worrying about muscle loss, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. I echoed that completely in terms of just flat out being way too worried about catabolism, and even like you said, like the 2 pounds thing. That's perfect, because you'll even see competitors and coaches still like saying, "Oh, I lost too much muscle during this prep or whatever." It's like, what did you do then? Even like you said, naturally, if you really felt that you lost too much muscle, and anyone listening, if you've said that, be like, "Yeah, I lost a lot of muscle during my last prep," I would venture to say, and this is going to break some hearts, is that you just didn't have the muscle to begin with, and that you had a lot of, because fat can take like a good shape. Fat can go from wherever to whenever. It's like I've seen girls with nice glutes in a sense of that they're shapely and they're round, and then when they hit the contest prep, they're like, oh my god, I lost all the muscle in my glutes. It's like, no, you probably just had really well shaped fat around the glutes, or like the bubble butt or whatever, right? It's the same thing with guys. They're like, oh, I lost all my size in my chest and my arm. Well, first off, are you depleted of glycogen? Which that's, like, of course, something to go over too. But did you really have that muscle to begin with? Because that's something that I definitely definitely dipped into as a younger man was, wow, man, I lost so much muscle during this cut. Here I am being 20 years old, which, no, Marty, you just didn't have the damn muscle to begin with. And it's like, oh. And it breaks some hearts, but you can either take that towards the positive in the sense of, okay, spend some better time in the off season doing things better, more correct, or you can be butthurt about it and think that it's all the nutrition's fault or whatever, which just didn't pan out in the science. And that, I'm glad I learned that, and I'm glad you brought that up. So
Yeah.
I would say that the next one I have here would be a little bit too much of over focusing on protein as a macronutrient. And what I mean by that is, as in, it's something that always needs to be kept on absurdly high levels. And the science that started to come out about that, about like even we'll say that general 1 gram of 1 gram of protein per pound lean body mass. So if you are 200 pounds and 10% body fat, and you are so then 180 grams of protein or something. I'm just throwing out figures there just for a sense of simplicity. Is that 180 you don't need to blow over and go to 300 or 400 grams of protein. Now, of course, there is the science of the thermic effect of feeding, and there is the science of it. The protein is the only macro that obviously can turn into amino acids outside of your own muscle, so that, like, carbohydrate can't turn into amino acid, fat can't turn into an amino acid. So sure, it is a very important macronutrient, but I'm saying that an over focus on it, like as in people jacking protein levels at the expense of fat and carbohydrate, and really pushing fat and carbohydrate down extremely low for during a fat loss phase, and making sure that protein is way too high. It doesn't need to be that way. You can enjoy other foods. You can have your carbohydrates or your fats a bit higher. Be a little bit more sane. Also save some money at the grocery store, not having to buy expensive meat all the time, and you will still get the same damn results, if not better, because psychologically you're not going, damn, all I have to eat is friggin' protein.
I think what I've learned about protein is it's probably the most versatile macronutrient.
Sure. Of course it is. Yep.
In terms of you have the most variance in what you can do with it with not a lot of difference in result, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I definitely, now we have those protein overfeeding studies and stuff that kind of come out here not too long ago. And they showed some cool stuff as far as like the thermic effect and stuff, but also like if I look at it and I say, yeah, it gives us, maybe we burn X percentage of extra calories, and it's something very small, I'm sure. But we're in a contest prep when calories are really low, and this person just feels better and their mood's better and so on and so forth if they have a little more carbs in their diet. Well, I'm not going to increase protein at the expense of them feeling and performing like shit. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not worth it. So that's just kind of one of those cases of looking at practical application versus what it says in the study, not being too set on that. Now, I will also say that I have experimented with it. I have guys that eat like obscene amounts of protein, way above and beyond, and going into like what these protein overfeeding studies, and they get some pretty cool results. But I also have a guy right now that he's a big guy, naturally muscular. He's a natural competitor. He walks around pretty lean at like 230 or 40 pounds.
Whoa.
Like, he's a big dude, and he's of, I think he's probably of like Samoan ethnicity or something along those lines. So kind of a big, normally that those, we see those ethnicities, very big people in general.
Sure.
He doesn't even hardly need any protein, and he feels better and he looks better without it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's it's just an individual thing. So what I could definitely say about protein is I found that there's a lot of variance in between. And so don't be afraid to kind of see what happens if you get up to high protein, you don't feel very good, your digestion's off, try lower protein. As long as you're meeting the minimum threshold, you know, beyond that, it's just personal preference at that point.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. I'm not against high protein levels. I'm saying trying to fit a box before of saying that people needed this obscene amount of protein, regardless of personal preference or whatever. That was why my mistake was not saying, okay, if you want to have the high protein, cool. If you enjoy it, that's cool. Like you said, digestion's cool. But if that's like trying to fit everyone into that box, and then they can't handle the protein, or be like, no, this is what has to happen. This is what you're supposed to do, as opposed to no, it doesn't have to be that way. And I love that you said that there's the guy with the, like, they can not even survive, but they can still gain muscle tissue off of lower protein levels, or still retain all their muscle tissue off of lower protein levels. That is there. And I love those protein overfeeding studies. And you know what? They do work. Of course, and it's really cool. I remember Alan Aragon was talking about, he was doing those. He was lowering carbohydrates down and shooting protein up for like a couple refeed strategies or whatever. But he even said, who the hell wants to do that? To sit there and like choke down, and I'll use the term choke down, 400, 500, 600 grams of protein a day, you probably aren't going to be the happiest. Now, and you even said one of the best quotes here is that if it happens in a lab, doesn't necessarily happen in the real world, or really doesn't happen in the real world. So cool, if you wanted to be so minutia dependent and say, okay, I'm having the 400 grams of protein refeed or the 600 grams of protein refeed, doing that is super cool. Those people come along few and far between. We'll call them the dream clients, that they'll basically eat sawdust if they know it's going to be that much more beneficial to them. But then I'll go a little bit further into the psychology that if I had someone have a protein refeed and they were never seeing carbs and they enjoyed carbs, they were never seeing fats and they really enjoyed fats, that they are going to be like, damn, I've got another 10 weeks or whatever left of this. I've got to do that. Okay, then their mood dips, training dips, sleep dips, everything dips. And so that's when now the psychological is outweighing the potential physiological benefit of that protein. And that's when we start dipping into some scary areas.
Yep. And it's just one of those things, again, like anything else, they also get too worried about what other people are doing, and they don't understand the full context. Well, why is someone eating this much or that much and I'm not? Well, so-and-so also is enhanced and you're not, or so-and-so is also, I mean, there's just so many things that make a difference. It's completely individual at the end of the day, for sure.
Yeah, you got it. How about anything else that you have to go over that you made a mistake?
Oh man, well, I'm sure there's definitely a lot of mistakes.
Like we could even make this be like a little bit of a series here, because I know I can come up with more stuff, and that will just be more informative, because some people I still know, including like myself, I'm still finding out things that I could have been a little bit better at, and we could keep talking about that too, like as in what did we do with diet strategies for even just muscle gain, like we already talked about the protein, being a little bit more lax on that, and how that ties into the mind as well, in terms of like I didn't put enough emphasis on sleep in the beginning days, and now I put quite a bit more emphasis on sleep. So it's even mistakes we could eat, like that'll be a little bit different, as opposed to just what could we have done better, or what was the information not there, which is the last two podcasts we recorded were kind of about that. But just flat out mistakes would have been the ones that I kind of said there, in terms of the training, in terms of the not looking further past the protein levels, the being way too heavy into am I going to lose muscle, and the catabolism and things like that, for sure.
Yeah, and one of these days, for everyone listening, we ought to do an episode on just outliers that we've come across, like just shit that doesn't even make any sense, that you just have to hear the story. to believe it.
Oh yes, and like, and that, you know what, that's perfect. We'll write that. See, see, people, this is how we come up with our super genius ideas. Is that we say that because like it is because outliers are there because you will see these people, like we'll say, I remember a couple of my buddies in high school that would have abs and they'd be jacked and they were on the football team with me and be like, how the hell are these guys looking like that? And they are outliers. They are genetic wonders. They probably eat really well anyways. Sometimes they don't, and you can bang your head against the wall. And that would, I would say, as a not a coach, but as a person interested in bodybuilding, I would beat my head against the wall saying, why don't I look like that? And I'm doing so much more than them in a sense of, like we'll say, science and training and the sleep and the food. But yeah, there are the outliers, and to not get discouraged by the outliers would have been a mistake that I made.
Speaking of which, before we cut this off, and some of the people listening have probably heard it, did you see, I'm trying to think of what show it was. Maybe it was like Tampa Pro or Orlando or something. I can't remember, but it was Michael Lockett won the show.
I was just about to talk about Michael Lockett.
Did you watch that? Did you watch that interview?
I didn't watch the interview. No, go for it.
Oh my God. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard. It's literally, I literally was doing cardio and I like almost fell off the bike.
Okay.
And I had to show everyone. It was, he gets interviewed by NBC News Online because they're the ones who do all the show coverage here in the States. And he says, and the guy asked him, hey, what did you do different? You look real sharp at this show, a little bit sharper than usual and fuller than usual. And he says, well, I was talking to my girlfriend and she said that I always look better in the off season. I would look fuller, but just as tight. So I changed my nutrition a little bit. And this isn't word for word, but it's
paraphrasing.
You get the idea. And he said, and he's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I just did what I did in the off season. I just ate whatever I wanted. He's like, I didn't pull water. I didn't do anything. I didn't do any cardio. I just ate whatever I wanted. Like, what? And the guy was floored. Yeah. He was floored. And he's like, I don't think anyone in the IFBB right now wanted to hear that.
No.
And he was like, I was laughing so hard. He's like, yeah, I just ate whatever I wanted. And I looked my best. I just kind of showed up and they put tan on and got on stage.
Oh,
I'm like,
oh man.
Oh my God.
That is the exact wrong thing. Like, imagine if people just go, okay, cool, I'm just gonna not change anything. That's the secret, is keep the off season. So, you know what? As absolutely hilarious it is, I love that you said him, because he's got to have top 0.0001% of the genetically elite is Michael Lockett, just because. Like, outside of him being a flat outlier, which I doubt he is, and he's actually eating like tilapia and green beans for every meal, is that I'm pretty sure he does eat like off. He does not have a great strict program or whatever in terms of nutrition, but he does look phenomenal. He would be definitely in that outlier percentage for sure. But the success leaves clues in the sense of, I bet you if we were to look at something like Mike, and maybe he was more relaxed in the off season, he wasn't as worried during the off season, or maybe he was happier during the off. Like his girlfriend said, like, you know, you look better because maybe the stress was not there. There will be some kind of clue there, even in the friggin' outliers. Even if nothing nutritionally or training wise makes sense, there's gonna be something. Maybe he slept an extra hour or something. There's gonna be something there, which of course they themselves, Michael himself, probably has no idea that that's the reason why he looked that better. Like, we were to look at all, we'll say, the science, we look at the food, we look at the training, and it's all there, but no one's saying, like, hey man, like, how was your mood? Like, were you arguing with your family and your girlfriend the last prep and now you weren't? Like, there's so much to this, and that's why I love friggin' coaching. That's why I love biofeedback, like we said, getting better at interpreting that, right? Because that's just it. I love that. I just ate the same and I looked better.
It's funny because he lived in Ohio.
Okay.
Right, just north of where I lived, and several clients that I had knew him. They went to the same gym, and they said, no joke, at the local shows, and he was still a freak when he was an amateur.
Yep.
There would be days where he would go compete, and then he would do a 2-hour workout between prejudging and the night show. Not joking.
And that makes even less sense than the I ate and eat the same as the off season, right? Like, that makes even less sense.
Yeah. And he would eat once a day, twice a day, drink Coke, and eat Skittles.
My God, I knew he was one of my team, because I love Skittles too. That's my weakness. And I was like, that's my boy. He's eating Skittles, getting shredded. That's what's up. There's the secret, right? So, oh man, what a way to to end the podcast, because that's it. We'll definitely start talking about outliers next time and what to not take away from outliers and what to take away from outliers. But yeah, do you have anything else to add there?
No, I'm good for today.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Broadcast, and we will see you next time.